had lived for 347 standard years. She had spent most of that time doing one thing, collecting nightmares. Not real nightmares, of course. Stories, tales of horror from across the galaxy. She worked at the Galactic Archive of Terror, the largest collection of scary stories in known space. Every species that joined the Galactic Council was required to submit their folklore to the archive. It was considered an important cultural exchange. Understanding what frightened a species told you a lot about how they thought. Had read thousands of these stories. She had the singing darkness of 442b, a strange cloud of living shadow that swallowed light and sound. She had indexed the recursive dreams of the Andromeda cluster, a mental virus that trapped victims in endless loops of false awakening. She had preserved holographic recordings of the flesh tides, a biological disaster that had consumed 3-star systems before it was stopped. Nothing surprised her anymore, nothing scared her. She had seen too much. Then the humans arrived. Humanity had only recently achieved interstellar travel. They were new to the galactic community, still learning the rules and customs of a civilization that had existed for millions of years. Most species looked down on them. Humans were loud, aggressive, and strangely fragile. They needed to breathe a specific mixture of gases. They could only survive in a narrow range of temperatures. Their bodies broke easily. But they were curious, and they were everywhere. Human diplomats, scientists, and traders spread across the galaxy like water filling cracks in stone. First encountered a human at a cultural exchange dinner on Nexus Station. His name was, and he worked as a diplomatic for the human government. He was small by galactic standards, with brown skin and dark hair and eyes that seemed to be constantly watching everything around him. Found him interesting. Most species avoided her. Her appearance was unsettling to many beings. She had a body like a large slug, covered in chromatophores that changed color with her emotions. Her face, if you could call it that, was dominated by 6 large eyes arranged in a circle. Her primary tentacles were longer than most humans were tall, but did not seem bothered by her appearance. He talked to her easily, asking questions about the archive and her work. When she explained that she collected horror stories, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. "We have those too," he said. "We call them urban legends." "I would be interested in acquiring some for the archive," said. "It is standard practice when a new species joins the council." "Sure," said. "I can put together a collection for you." He smiled when he said it. Did not understand human facial expressions very well, but something about that smile stayed with her. The first file arrived 3 cycles later. Opened it in her private study, surrounded by the soft glow of archived horrors. She expected simple stories, primitive superstitions from a young species, tales of predators or natural disasters dressed up as monsters. The first story was called The Rake. It described a creature, pale, thin, almost skeletal. It had long arms and legs and moved on all 4s. It appeared at night in bedrooms at the foot of sleeping people, and it watched. That was the horror of it. The rake did not attack immediately. It did not make noise. It simply crouched there in the darkness, staring at its victim with black eyes. Sometimes it stayed for hours. Sometimes it came back night after night. And when it finally attacked, when it finally moved, there was no warning. Just the watching, the endless watching. When finished reading, she realized something strange. Her primary tentacles had retracted against her thorax. Her chromatophores had flushed pale. These were involuntary fear responses. She had not experienced them since she was a child. It was just a story, a simple story from a primitive species. So why was her body reacting like she was in actual danger? She immediately requested more files. Within a lunar cycle, had assembled 47 human urban legends. She read them alone, one after another, trying to understand what made them so effective. There was a story about a tall, thin figure in a dark suit. It had no face, just smooth white skin where features should be. It appeared in photographs behind children. It stood in forests at the edge of vision. You could never quite see it directly, but it was always there, watching, waiting. They called it Slender Man. There was a story about an old woman who asked strangers if she was pretty. If they said yes, she removed her mask to reveal a mouth that had been cut from ear to ear. If they said no, she killed them. If they said yes after seeing her true face, she cut their mouth to match hers. The slit-mouthed woman could not be escaped. She was faster than any human. There was a story about a television station that broadcast a children's show late at night. The show featured a man in a dog costume who invited children to play with him. The station had no record of ever broadcasting the program. The children who watched it were never seen again. There was a story about a tunnel that existed in every city, a tunnel that did not appear on any map. If you went inside, the tunnel would keep going. It would go on forever, and the things that lived in the darkness between the walls could hear you walking. Read them all. She measured her physical responses, her emotional reactions, and she grew more frightened with each story. This should not be possible. The Galactic Terror Index was a standardized measurement system. It rated horror narratives based on their psychological impact across multiple species. The scale ran from 1 to 10. Most species folklore rated between 2.3 and 4.7. These were effective stories, capable of creating mild discomfort and triggering instinctive caution. The human urban legends averaged 8.9. Checked her calculations. She ran the measurements again. The numbers did not change. She brought her findings to the Archive Council. The council was made up of senior archivists from a dozen species. They met in a large chamber at the center of the archive, surrounded by floating displays showing data from across the galaxy. Had presented findings to them many times before. This time felt different. She started with the numbers. The council members studied the Terror Index ratings. Several of them made sounds of disbelief. "This must be an error," said High Curator, a massive being of living crystal. "A species at their development level cannot produce narratives of this magnitude." "I have the data," said, multiple times. "Then demonstrate," said the representative, a tall figure wrapped in ceremonial robes. They were known for their emotional control. Nothing disturbed them. Played an audio recording. It was a human voice reading a story called The Russian Sleep Experiment. The story described what happened when humans were kept awake for 15 days using experimental gas. She had chosen this story specifically because it did not rely on visual horror. The terror was in the ideas, in what the human subjects became when they stopped sleeping. 3 council members had to be sedated before the recording finished. The representative requested a recess. When she returned, her hands were shaking. "How is this possible?" demanded. "How does a species barely capable of interstellar travel produce psychological weapons of this magnitude?" Had been asking herself the same question. "I do not know," she admitted. "Their development level suggests they should produce primitive fear narratives, basic predator warnings, simple cautionary tales. Instead, they have created something that affects beings with completely different neurology, different sensory systems, different concepts of existence. Their stories should not work on us." "But they do," said the quietly. "They work very well." Silence fell over the council chamber. Finally spoke. "We need to understand this. Contact the Human Diplomatic Corps. Tell them we require an expert in their psychology." The crystal being paused, their internal light flickering with unease. "Tell them we need to know how they learned to do this, and more importantly, we need to know if they understand what they have created." Thought about smile when he offered to send her stories. She thought about how easily he had agreed, how casually. She was beginning to wonder if humans understood exactly what they were doing. And that thought frightened her most of all. Doctor had studied aliens her entire career. She was which meant she specialized in understanding how non-human minds worked. She had spent years learning to read the body language of species with no bodies, the emotional expressions of beings who communicated through chemical signals, and the thought patterns of creatures whose brains were distributed across multiple organisms. She was good at her job, very good. That was why the human diplomatic corps had assigned her to explain something that even she found difficult to put into words. She stood before the Archive Council in a chamber designed to intimidate. It was vast and dark, lit only by floating displays and the bioluminescent glow of various council members. The ceiling disappeared into shadow. The walls seemed to absorb sound. Everything about the space was designed to make visitors feel small and temporary. Was not intimidated. She had grown up in Mexico City, a place where 20 million humans lived packed together in a maze of concrete and steel. She had learned early that looking weak was dangerous. She looked at the assembled beings, some of whom had lived for thousands of years, and she waited for them to speak first. It was who broke the silence. The archivist floated forward on her slug-like body, her 6 eyes fixed on with obvious curiosity. "We have studied your species for several cycles now," said. "We have analyzed your horror narratives using every tool available to us. We have measured their psychological impact across 17 different species, and we cannot explain what we are seeing." "What are you seeing?" asked. "Impossibility." Chromatophores flickered through several colors. "Your stories affect beings with completely different neurological structures, different evolutionary histories, different concepts of existence. A crystalline has nothing in common with neither has anything in common with a human, yet your urban legends frighten all of them equally. This should not be possible. Fear responses are species-specific. They are tied to evolutionary pressures and survival instincts. There is no universal fear." "Except there is," said calmly. "We found it." The council stirred. Several members leaned forward, could feel their attention focusing on her like a physical weight. "You want to know why our scary stories work on everyone," she continued. "It is not a complicated answer, but I need you to understand something about human history first." She activated her personal display unit. An image appeared in the air above her, projected large enough for everyone in the chamber to see. It showed Earth as it had looked 200,000 years ago. Vast grasslands stretched across continents. Dense forests covered entire regions. Oceans teemed with life. "This is said. We call it a death world. I know that term gets used a lot. Many species claim to come from harsh environments, but I need you to understand what it actually means for us." She pulled up another image. This one showed early humans, small and fragile, moving across an open plain. Around them, in the tall grass and distant trees, predators watched. Great cats with fangs as long as human forearms. Packs of wild dogs that could run for hours without tiring. Birds with talons that could crush bone. "For 200,000 years," said, "we were prey." She let that word hang in the air. Not apex predators, not the dominant species. Prey. We were hunted by things faster than us, stronger than us, better equipped than us. We had no claws, no fangs, no armor. We could not see in the dark. We could not run as fast as the things that wanted to eat us. By every reasonable measure, we should have gone extinct. "But you did not," said quietly. "No, we did not, because we developed something else. Something that no amount of physical advantage could match," tapped her head. "We became paranoid." She changed the image again. This one showed a human brain, with certain regions highlighted in red. "Our minds evolved to see threats everywhere. We developed hyperactive pattern recognition. We started finding faces in random shapes. We started hearing voices in the wind. We assumed every shadow hid a predator. Every rustle of grass meant something was hunting us. We became afraid of everything because everything was trying to kill us." "This explains why humans are easily frightened," said the crystalline delegate. "It does not explain why your stories frighten others." "I am getting to that," said. "The fear was not enough. Being afraid did not keep us alive. We needed to do something with that fear. We needed to prepare for threats before they appeared, so we started telling each other stories. She paused, making sure everyone was following. At first, the stories were simple, warnings about real dangers. Do not go near the water, there are creatures that will drag you under. Do not sleep alone, the cats hunt at night. But over time, the stories changed. We started imagining dangers that did not exist, monsters that no real predator could match, horrors that broke the rules of nature. "Why would you do this?" asked the representative. "What purpose does it serve to frighten yourselves with impossible threats?" Smiled. Several council members shifted uncomfortably at the expression. Because if we could imagine the worst possible threat and still function, we could handle anything reality threw at us. Our horror stories are not entertainment. They are training simulations. We stress test our minds against nightmares so that real dangers seem manageable by comparison. She let that sink in before continuing. For 200,000 years, we refined these stories. We passed them down through generations. We made them scarier and more effective with each telling. The stories that worked got remembered. The stories that did not got forgotten. It was evolution applied to fear itself. "You are saying that human horror has been naturally selected," said slowly. "That your nightmares are optimized by the same process that shapes living things." "Exactly. And here is the part that should frighten you." Looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes as she could. "Our stories are not designed to scare humans. They are designed to scare the things that scare humans. They are built to terrify predators, to make even dangerous creatures hesitate. You are experiencing psychological weapons that have been refined over countless generations to unnerve beings far more dangerous than us." Silence filled the chamber. "Compared to what our ancestors imagined in the dark," said quietly, "you are all relatively safe, relatively familiar, relatively understandable. You have rules. You have behaviors that can be predicted. You can be fought or escaped or negotiated with." She paused. "The things in our stories cannot. That is the point. That is why they work." High Curator spoke, their voice resonating through the chamber. "You are saying that humanity has spent 200,000 years developing weapons-grade psychological terror as a survival mechanism." "Yes." "And that this terror is calibrated to affect beings more dangerous than yourselves." "Yes." "And that by comparison, we are less frightening than your imaginary monsters." Nodded. "Much less frightening. I mean this with no disrespect, but from a human perspective, most of you are almost comforting. You have bodies and faces. You exist in physical space. You can be seen and understood. Our worst nightmares are things that exist in the spaces between moments. Things that hide in reflections and shadows. Things that cannot be fought because they do not follow any rules." The representative made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it contained no humor. "I believe I understand now. When we read human horror, we are experiencing what it is like to be prey on your world." "Yes," said. "That is exactly what you are experiencing. Welcome to our nightmares. We invented them to scare ourselves." She gathered her materials and prepared to leave. "One more thing," she said, pausing at the edge of the chamber. "On Earth, we share these stories with our children. We tell them at sleepovers and summer camps. We scare ourselves for entertainment." She smiled again. "Maybe that is the part that should really frighten you. We consider this fun." The council sat in stunned silence as she walked away. 3 standard years passed after Doctor's presentation to the Archive Council. In that time, everything changed. The Galactic Archive of Terror underwent a complete reorganization. Human urban legends now occupied their own dedicated wing, a vast section of the archive that required special clearance to enter. Warning signs in 12 languages marked the entrances. Psychological screening was mandatory for any researcher who wanted to study the contents. Had become famous. She was now the galaxy's foremost expert on human horror, a position that had not existed 3 years ago. She gave lectures to packed auditoriums. She published a 12-volume treatise titled The Nightmare Makers: Human Fear as Universal Constant. She advised species on exposure protocols, carefully graduated introductions to human narratives that minimized psychological trauma. She had also become somewhat strange. Other archivists noticed that she rarely slept anymore. When she did sleep, she kept the lights on. But the true impact of revelations extended far beyond the archive. The hegemony was a military empire that had terrorized 3 sectors for centuries. Their warships were feared across the galaxy. Their soldiers were genetically engineered for combat. They had conquered dozens of worlds and showed no signs of stopping. Then their intelligence operatives acquired a collection of human horror stories. The collection included a narrative called The Russian Sleep Experiment. It described what happened when humans were kept awake for 15 days using experimental gas. The subjects stopped sleeping. They stopped eating. They tore their own flesh. They begged to be kept awake because the things they saw when they closed their eyes were worse than any torture. It also included stories about creatures that lived in mirrors, entities that existed in static between television channels, and a place called where the walls went on forever and something was always walking just behind you. 17 commanders experienced simultaneous psychological breaks after reading the collection. Their military coordination collapsed. Within a cycle, the hegemony quietly from all space adjacent to human territory. Their official explanation cited logistical concerns. Nobody believed it. The singing darkness of 442b was not a species. It was a phenomenon, a semi-sentient cloud of living shadow that drifted between stars, consuming light and sound wherever it went. It had swallowed 12 colonies before anyone understood what it was. No weapon could harm it. No defense could stop it. The Galactic Council had classified the sector as permanently lost. Then the singing darkness encountered a human research vessel. The vessel was called the Prometheus. It carried a crew of 37 scientists who were studying stellar phenomena at the edge of explored space. When the darkness appeared on their sensors, they knew they were dead. There was no escape. The darkness was faster than any ship. Captain made a decision. If they were going to die, they would die fighting. But they had no weapons that could hurt the darkness, so they used what they had. The Prometheus began broadcasting on all frequencies. Audio recordings of human horror stories, visual transmissions of and scary images, every file in their entertainment database that could be classified as frightening. They ran the broadcast on a loop, pouring human nightmares into the void between stars. The singing darkness stopped. It had never stopped before. In 12 recorded encounters, the darkness had never hesitated. It consumed everything in its path without pause or consideration. But now it stopped. It hung in space, its form flickering and churning. The scientists watched on their sensors, not daring to breathe. And then the darkness retreated. It pulled back from the Prometheus. It pulled back from the entire sector. It fled into deep space, moving faster than it had ever moved before. Subsequent analysis suggested that the entity had experienced something analogous to fear. The singing darkness had eaten stars. It had consumed worlds. It had spread across light years without anything to stop it. And it had been frightened by human stories. News of the encounter spread across the galaxy. Scientists debated what had happened. Politicians discussed implications. Military strategists revised their assessments of human capabilities. Humanity's reputation in galactic society shifted dramatically. They were no longer viewed as the aggressive newcomers or the lucky survivors. They became something else entirely. The species whose imagination was dangerous. The people who had weaponized fear itself. Diplomatic negotiations became notably more favorable to human interests. Trade agreements tilted in humanity's direction. The Galactic Council granted humanity 3 additional seats, an unprecedented expansion of their representation. Some species tried to reproduce human horror. They studied the stories and attempted to create their own versions. The results were disappointing. Without 200,000 years of evolutionary pressure, without the specific paranoia that came from being prey on a death world, the stories lacked impact. They were scary, but not terrifying. Unpleasant, but not traumatizing. Human horror remained unique, and humanity remained the only species that could produce it. Visited's office 3 years to the day after he first sent her the collection of urban legends. He looked the same as she remembered him. Small, dark-eyed, with that strange smile that she had learned to recognize as amusement. "I hear you have become famous," he said, settling into a chair that was not designed for his body. "I have become obsessed," corrected. "There is a difference." "Is there?" Looked around her office. The walls were covered with displays showing human horror imagery, pale figures in dark suits, corridors that went on forever, faces with too many eyes or not enough features. "You have collected quite a lot since we first talked." "I cannot stop," admitted. "Every time I think I have all of human horror, I discover something new, something worse. There are always more nightmares. How do you produce so many?" "We have a lot of practice." Smile widened slightly. "We have been scaring each other for a very long time." "Yes," Doctor explained the evolutionary mechanism. "I understand it intellectually, but understanding does not diminish the effect." Chromatophores flickered with frustration. "Your stories still frighten me, even after 3 years of study, even knowing exactly how they work. Why?" Was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You know what I think? I think it is because our horror is honest. We do not hide from our fears. We drag them into the light. We give them names and faces and stories. We force ourselves to look at the things that scare us most." "That sounds painful." "It is, but it is also freeing. When you have imagined the worst thing possible, everything else seems manageable." Leaned forward. "Your species avoid fear. You treat it as weakness, something to be controlled and hidden. We embrace it. We celebrate it. We share our nightmares with each other like gifts." Considered this. "You are saying that human horror is a form of bonding." "Yes, when we scare each other, we are saying that we trust each other with our vulnerabilities. We are admitting that we are afraid and inviting others to be afraid with us. It is intimate." "I do not understand how fear can be intimate." "Neither do most humans, honestly. We just know that it is." Stood up, preparing to leave. "Can I tell you something that might frighten you even more?" Hesitated, then nodded. "Everything you have collected, everything in your archive, all of it represents our published horror. The stories we chose to share with outsiders. The nightmares we considered appropriate for galactic audiences." Smile faded. "There are stories we keep to ourselves. Things we only share with other humans. Fears too personal, too specific, too dark for anyone else to understand." His eyes met hers, and for a moment saw something ancient in them. Something that had survived being prey on a death world. "You have seen what we are willing to show you," said quietly. "You have not seen what we keep hidden." He left without another word. Sat alone in her office for a long time, surrounded by displays of human horror. She thought about what it said. She thought about the stories she had collected, the nightmares she had, the fears she had analyzed and indexed. All of it was just the surface. Somewhere, humans were telling each other scarier stories, darker stories, tales of horror that they did not trust the galaxy to understand. And those stories had been refined by the same evolutionary pressure, the same 200,000 years of paranoid survival. What could possibly be worse than what she had already seen? Did not know, and that unknowing frightened her more than any story she had ever read. The galactic archive of terror would continue to grow. Humanity would continue to share their nightmares, carefully selected for alien audiences. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, in the spaces between moments, In the reflections that did not quite match reality, the oldest human fears continued to lurk. Because the most dangerous thing in the universe was not a weapon or a warship or a predator that had evolved for millions of years. It was a frightened ape with an active imagination. And humanity had been imagining monsters since before they could speak.